It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the Miami Heat's television broadcast producer, AJ Speaks. How are you doing today?
I'm excellent, Brandon. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to work in professional sports?
Be honest with you, I didn't know I wanted to work in professional sports. Like a lot of people, I had aspirations to be a professional athlete myself. And I thought that I was good enough until reality set in. And I realized that I'm just a country boy from Southwest Virginia that's lucky to be 5'9" on a good day and not athletic enough to play in the NBA. And so what I realized is that I needed to have different goals and different dreams and start looking for other ways to be involved in sports. And what I found was there was a person named Roy Firestone. You ever heard of Roy Firestone?
No.
So I want you, this is part of your task. You got to Google him. So Roy Firestone was a television host for ESPN, and he had a show called Up Close. And it was Up Close with Roy Firestone. And really what it was is a lot like what you're doing now. It was an interview show. And he had a unique interview style. And his interview style was he would get athletes. This is way before social media. He would get athletes to open up to him. Have you ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire?
Yes.
Okay, now I'm feeling a little bit better. So he was the guy in Jerry Maguire that interviewed the player, Cuba Gooding Jr. And he's like, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. That's who Roy Firestone is. And so he played a big part for me because I saw him on TV. I saw that he wasn't an athlete. I saw that he was really good at his job. And I looked at that job as something that I could possibly do. So that became my aspiration was, hey, I want to work in sports. I want to work, behind the scenes in sports. Well, at the time I wanted to be on air in sports, and I aspired to be like Roy Firestone.
How did you know that you wanted to work in television broadcasts?
Well, that kind of just happened, to be honest with you. I didn't know that I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to work in sports. I wanted to work in television because of Roy Firestone. But it's a unique path, right? So I went from Virginia to a military school, Fort Union Military Academy. It was the best decision I ever made because I was just a lazy kid that didn't have discipline. And that postgraduate year really helped me get focused. And then from there, I was able to apply and get into colleges that I would have never thought I could get into. And so I was accepted into Seton Hall University, and that experience there, being able to intern there, being able to do radio shows there, being able to just be exposed to the Big East and basketball and all the people that are in the Northeast, that allowed me to think, okay, there's some opportunities here. And so I did an internship at HBO Sports, and at HBO Sports, it just opened my eyes to everything about sports television. That moment there really was the pivotal moment where it's like, okay, there's jobs here. I had a competitive internship, really competitive. There's 4 of us and we would go at it. And each one was trying to prove who could be the best intern. And I wasn't sure if it was me or not, but I'll tell you this, there was a day when one of the interns who had a leg up on us all decided he didn't want to go do his job that day. So he had to do something that wasn't sexy. We were working the Goodwill games. He had to hold a boom mic in the corner for a wrestling event, and he just didn't want to do it. So he bailed. I wasn't even in New York at the time. I was in Jersey at school, and they called me and said, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And I answered, whatever you want me to do. Little did I know that answer is what ended up getting me a job at HBO Sports later, working as a production assistant, as a stage manager, and so on and so forth on boxing, because I was willing to just go do whatever he didn't want to do. And that's what separated me. So that experience there working at HBO Sports is really what introduced me into working in professional sports and recognizing that this could become a career.
That's amazing. What is your college experience like to get you to where you are now?
It's a good question. I was fortunate in college. Now I'll backtrack and tell you one thing about college. I don't have any regrets about going to Seton Hall because I really, really enjoyed my experience at Seton Hall. The one thing I would change is why I picked Seton Hall. I picked Seton Hall because it was in the Big East and I had heard of it. A couple people had told me about this school in New York called Fordham. Now I'm from Virginia. I don't really know all the New York, but it's like, yeah, Fordham. And I'm like, it's not in the Big East. I don't know about that. That was a mistake. I should have went to explore that because Fordham's broadcasting program, as you know, has a lot of legendary voices in it, but I was not aware enough. The internet wasn't, I had a big book. That's how I got my college information. It was a huge book, and you scroll through all of it and you look to see where you wanted to go, and you're like, oh, this place. So that was one mistake. And I try to encourage people, don't pick a school just because of the name or the conference or whatever. Find that school that really is going to give you the experiences that you need in order for you to be able to grow. Now, you don't know that at 17, 18, 19 years old, but, I just encourage people to explore and keep an open mind and don't just go after the pretty school. Or, later in life, you learn don't just go after the pretty person or whatever it is. It's got to be about that substance. So Seton Hall ended up having substance for me, and it allowed me to just be on the mic. It allowed me to go. I was able to travel to Alaska calling basketball games for the Great Alaskan Shootout. I was able to just get all of these different experiences on the radio side. The television side wasn't as broad as some of the other schools, but the radio side really was well developed. And so I was able to get a lot of experiences on the radio side. And then I was in near the city, so I was able to intern. And then that experience landed me at HBO. But one other thing, the other thing about college that was great was that you were able to find out the things that you didn't want to do. So here's, for example, I mentioned Jerry Maguire. For a minute, I wanted to be a sports agent like Jerry Maguire. I'm like, oh, this is the coolest job in the world. Well, what would happen was I ended up interning for a sports agent, and I just learned how unscrupulous the business is. And at the time, he was chasing this player, and his name was Fernando Tatis Sr. Little did we know he was going to end up having a super famous son. But at that time, he was chasing him, trying to get him. He did everything he could to get him. And I'm like, I do not want to do this for a living, man. Like, I have no interest in doing that. But that was a good thing. Internships are a good thing because you get to learn what you like and you get to learn what you don't like. So I strongly encourage people to do internships in all kinds of different fields so that you can get a taste of everything and figure out where your passion really lies.
What landed you to work in professional sports, of course, with the Miami Heat, Miami Dolphins?
I'm going to give you the short version of this story, but the really what it was is I wanted to go to the Olympics. So in 2000, I finished grad school at Seton Hall, and I decided to travel, and I went over to Australia. I wanted to work the Olympics. My goal was to go to every Olympics from 2000 on. Well, that didn't happen. And remind me, I'll get back to the Olympics in a minute. But so I traveled for 2 years. I explored. I worked in St. Croix. I worked all over the place and coached basketball. I just had some good experiences, but I needed to buckle down and start working and paying bills and student loans and all those things. So I came to Miami, and I really didn't know anybody, but I was able to get a job in the inside sales department at Miami. And with inside sales, I was selling tickets. Now, here's the deal. I'm a pretty good talker, right? I know sports. I could talk. I'm like, okay, I'm going to kill it in sales. Brandon, I was awful. I couldn't sell water to a whale. Like, I was awful. And it's because I just can't ask people for money. It's just not in my nature. So one of those things, like, I had great conversations, and I would hear other people in the sales thing using my lines, and they would be selling, and I wasn't selling a thing. So I quickly realized, like, hey, I need to have a plan B and get up out of this sales department because they're going to fire me. I'm not going to make it very long. Well, what happened was they ended up having a boxing event at the American Airlines Arena when it was named the American Airlines Arena, which is soon to be FTX. They had a boxing event there, and I volunteered to help the broadcast department with the boxing event. And because I had experience at HBO Sports, I was able to bring those skills over to that department, and they weren't really prepared. They hadn't done an event like that before. So I did all the stage managing, I did everything, and I just showed them, like, hey, this is how we do it at HBO. And it was able to show that, hey, I have some skills outside of not being able to sell a ticket. And it brought me over into the broadcast department. And I was working on Heat TV, the in-arena broadcast department, and that was my way in. I came in, I was asked to edit. I wasn't a great editor, but I figured it out. I was asked to do events, live events. I was really good at that. So, started to realize, like, hey, live events, things on the fly, I could respond to those types of things. And I just kept working my way there. But what happened was there was a moment where I'm like, all right, I'm not making any money, man. I have a master's degree. I'm making like whatever, barely over minimum wage. Like, I need to do something. I need to get out of here. So, kid you not, Brandon, it was my birthday, and I'm like, I'm gone. It's in July. I'm going back to New York. I miss it, miss my friends. And on that day, this is back when the ticker, ESPN used to have the ticker. There wasn't all these alerts on your phones and all this stuff. And so at the bottom of the ticker, it scrolls across the bottom. It says, Miami Heat trade for Shaquille O'Neal. And I'm like, what? And that was the trade. They traded for Shaquille and it changed everything. It changed the organization. It changed job opportunities. The people in sales like me who couldn't sell were just taking orders. It was easy. Like, I could have sold to that, but I wasn't in sales. I had switched. But it created an opportunity for me to be able to become a part of the television broadcast. And by becoming a production assistant on the television broadcast, they asked me like, hey, would you have any interest in traveling? I'm like, well, of course, I wouldn't mind traveling with the team and being a production assistant with Shaq and this guy named Dwayne Wade, who was in his second year. Yeah, in his second year at the time, like, sure, I'll travel, And so then that became my introduction to traveling on the television broadcast for the Miami Heat. And from there, I just kept working and grinding and working and grinding. And any opportunity that would come my way, I would catch it. I try to, hey, you need help with this? Boom, I do it. Hey, you need help with this? Boom, I do it. I wouldn't let anything fall. And so my boss, Ted Ballard, and myself would just figure it out. He would throw things my way, I'd catch it. And we had a really good team. We still do have a really good team. And over years, that team developed and we just became a well-oiled machine. And that's sort of how it started.
What is your time like working with the Miami Marlins as a television producer?
So what happened was a couple years into working with the Heat, I would travel around with one of my buddies, and he went to Fork Union with me, and he played in the NBA. And so we would travel all over, and I quickly realized I was going broke. So I couldn't keep up with that lifestyle. And he would take care of things and so on and so forth. But again, I have too much pride, right? I told you that. So I can't ask people for money. So I'm one of those people. I would travel, I try to buy stuff, knowing that, like, I don't know why I'm paying for anything. But anyway, I quickly learned that I needed another stream of income. And that's where I learned this process of having multiple streams of income. So I applied for this job with the Miami Marlins. It was the Florida Marlins at the time, as a pregame producer. And all I wanted to do was to be able to go produce some of their pregames. I love baseball. So I'm like, okay, this will be a good fit. I ended up not getting the lead job. I ended up becoming a backup. And I was like, okay, be a backup, prove yourself. Well, not even a quarter of the way through the season, the main guy quit. He's like, I don't want to do this. This is too much. And so they asked me to do it. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't want to do all of it. I just wanted to do, some. So what happened was I ended up doing that whole summer. And I tell you, Brandon, baseball is a grind. People that work in baseball have my utmost respect because it's so different from basketball. Basketball, you go in and it is hard because you go in every day and you have to set up the truck unless you're on a homestand. You go in, you set up everything, and you play that game, then you leave, you go to the next city. That's the grind of basketball. It's like, but you have a couple of days off. Baseball, you work every day. And they talk about an off day. Their off days are travel days. That's not an off day. That's just a travel day, So we worked like 27 games in 29 days at that stretch. And I told myself, like, baseball, I do not want to do this every day. However, it was the best. It was a really good experience for me because I was no longer with that team I had told you about that was such a well-oiled machine. I was with a new team, and I had to learn and I had to prove myself and I had to just grow and all these things that I was so used to having Ted right next to me and LeVon behind me, and like, they weren't there. So now it's like, all right, AJ, you got to figure this out. And so I started having to figure it out, and it was good because it was growth. And it was like, now the pressure was on me. Like, hey, you got to carry this show. And so I started learning and like figuring out how to work with different people and how to get things done and how to organize stuff. And so it ended up becoming a great experience. And I still fill in for them freelance. It was always freelance, but they would ask me to come in. And so I ended up having a good role where the producer, John Solser, would travel and he'd go on vacation and I'd slide in for him. And I was a substitute teacher. So I was like, hey, substitutes here. You come in, you do some baseball. I like the Mets. So I'd always end up with the Mets series and, anywhere in the Northeast. I'm from the Northeast. So like that was cool. So you're like all around those places. So it ended up becoming a great opportunity. And over time, they just stopped scheduling me as much as they did. And so I just became a spot guy here and there. And so what happened was from that opportunity, I was like, man, I miss having that multiple stream of income. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm still working the Heat, but I'm like, you know what? I know where you're going next with this, Brandon. So I'm going to go ahead and lead you there. You know what? I'm going to go and apply for the Dolphins. And so the Dolphins ended up having a preseason producer leave. And so I reached out to some people and I said, hey, is there a possible opportunity? I said, yeah, we need a preseason producer. Cool, I'm your guy. So then I applied and I was able to be hired as the preseason producer for the Miami Dolphins. So I still do that. And that allows me to have this experience now where working football was different. I had never worked football, NFL football. I love football, but it's a whole different beast. And so you have to learn all those everything. The stadiums are different. Everything's different. But that's one of the best parts about working in this job, Brandon. So you get to walk into these arenas. You get to walk into these baseball stadiums. You get to walk into these footballs that you've seen on TV your whole life, right? And you're out there walking. For me, it was one of the moments was I was walking out in Shea Stadium in New York and right field, and I was just daydreaming about Darryl Strawberry. I'm like, yo, this is so cool, And to this day, when I still go to any of the football stadiums, I walked at Soldier Field and I'm just walking around like, wow, this is so cool. Even though it's not, it's been renovated or what have you, but it's still like just a great experience to be able to, in the NBA, I remember walking to the old Sacramento Kings floor and thinking about the games there and Portland's floor and just looking at that and like just recognizing how fortunate I am to be a country kid from Southwest Virginia. And next thing you know, I'm here on the floor, at some of these great arenas producing and being involved in a broadcast that has people that I'm working with like Shaq, like it's just nuts. And it's like, it wasn't something that I ever thought could be my dream. I thought it was a dream, and I'll kid you not, Brandon. One day I woke up and we landed in Denver and I woke up and Shaq standing over top of me. And I'm just like, am I dreaming? And he's so big. He's the biggest human being I've ever been around. And like, he has to turn his head on the airplane because he's so tall and he can't fit in the plane. So he turns his head and he looks over me and I'm gonna clean this up, but he says, I'm gonna mess you up. And I'm like, what? And I still think I'm dreaming because I just woke up. Well, it was snowing and he wanted to have a snowball fight. So I go outside and I'm on the tarmac and he's throwing these snowballs, but his hands are huge. So his snowballs look like, just no men. It's like he's just throwing it. And I'm just like, yo. So I get ready to pick up a snowball and I think about it, Brandon. And I'm like, yo, if I hit this dude and he don't play tomorrow, it's going to be my last snowball I ever throw. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it left-handed. So I was throwing everything left-handed and he was laughing at me. You can't throw, blah, blah, blah. But I say all that to say that like, it felt like a dream. Like I never thought that I would be in that moment to be a part of the NBA, to be running around having a snowball fight with Shaq, So you just never know where life can take you. But I will say that for me, it was always taking advantage of the opportunities that were granted and some of the opportunities that I created.
What was it like to balance working with the Miami Heat, Miami Marlins, and also the Miami Dolphins at the same time?
No, it's pretty easy because the Marlins, like I said, it was just a freelance gig that I would spot. So I come in there when they need me now, they just call me. Usually, hey, something happened. Can you fill in? Like, sure. So it's not a regular rotation like it was in the past when it was all the time. Like that became a lot. So fortunately for me, we go so hard. We start in basketball. We really start getting busy in September. And then it depends on how good our team is. So we usually end up, during the LeBron days, we'd end by July 1st. I would tell people, I'm like, hey, I won't be free until July 1st. And, we can go on vacation or do things after that. But before that, I'll be busy. but each team's different, right? So there's some teams when you're like, hey, I'll be free April 15th. Our season's going to end in the end of the regular season, and that's it. So you just don't know. So then what happened was football preseason is August usually, August right up into that first week of September. So that was a gap in my schedule where I was able to slide, or I still am able to slide in, do those 3 or 4 games. They keep reducing it, but do those three or 4 games and then go right back, transition right into basketball, which is good because it sharpens you, it gets you back in the truck, gets you back, getting back to the cadence of things that need to be in television. And so it's actually a really good thing, like almost a preseason to my preseason to get me ready for the season that's ahead.
What was it like for you whenever LeBron James was with the Miami Heat covering them?
I tell you what, man. First part I'll tell you is the day he made his decision. I was with the Marlins. I was traveling and I was producing. I was filling in and producing for the Marlins. So, I wasn't around, for his decision. So what I decided to do was, well, actually, their producer called me and he was like, hey, everybody's talking about this decision. He's like, that's all people are talking about here in South Florida. I was like, okay, cool. So for me as a producer, you're a storyteller, right? So one of the first things that you get to do is when the show starts, they have an open or a tease. And so you try to create that to start telling a story. So I happen to have some footage on me that had, I think I took it on purpose, but it had LeBron, it had D Wade, and it had Chris Bosh on it. So I built a little tease and I knew it was baseball. So I didn't want to go too heavy, but I just showed a little bit of video of these 3 guys. And I wrote a line like, hey, I know everyone in South Florida is talking about these 3 guys, but we have, and I switched into the Marlins and told the story that way. Well, when you're working on a TV broadcast, you have to collaborate. And one of the skills that I like to do is really collaborate with my announcers. And so in this case, the announcer saw the video, read the script, didn't want to do it. Didn't agree that that was the right thing to do. Didn't feel like putting basketball on a baseball broadcast was fair, and didn't think I would do it if it was the Heat. And so challenged me in that way. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to fight you on this. I probably would, given that, your regular producer is the one that's telling me how everyone's talking about it. But okay, I'm not going to fight you. So Brandon, we come on the air. Never forget it. It's like 7:30 West Coast time or whatever. It's right when we come on the air, right when LeBron announces that he's taking his talents to South Beach. I mean, right at the exact moment. So we come on with our bland tees that didn't have any basketball in it. And the announcer saw that Hanley Ramirez had written a sign that said, welcome LeBron. And he's like, hey, let me have that sign. And you were right. Like, thanks. Doesn't help us now that I was right, because it would have synced up so well, Brandon. Like it would have went straight from, hey, this to Hanley holding up his sign. And as a producer, your story is like, oh, I drilled it, because you trust your gut, and what you're doing for what I do in sports television, you got to trust your gut. You have to trust your basketball instincts, your baseball instincts, your storytelling instincts. You have to trust those things in order to be successful. So for me, trust and collaboration are extremely important. And in that case, I just didn't have that collaboration, but my instincts were right. So it just didn't work out. So that was my introduction to, hey, the Heat are getting LeBron. Well, fast forward a few months, he ends up coming to media day for the first time. And so we have to do our interviews with him. So I have this interview I'm producing, and it's the first time we're going to sit down with Dwayne, LeBron, and Chris Bosh. And when you walk in these rooms on media day, you get about 15 minutes. So they hold a clock and they'll tell you your clock has started. So you're always like racing against the clock to make sure that everything is organized and everything is right, and you get them in and get out. Well, the day they come in, D Wade walks in first. We know him. He walks in with about 3 or 4 people. And I'm just like, okay, we usually don't have these entourages, but whatever. Chris Bosh walks in. He walks in with about 3 or 4 people. I'm just like, man, all right. LeBron walks in with people. I'm like, yo, what is up with all these people? I only have 15 minutes, right? And so I see the guy had already started his clock. They're in there talking. I'm like, hey, listen, we got to get to it. So I just shut everything down, Brandon. I'm like, yo, boom, 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 boom. You sit here, let's do this. Boom. We start our interview. We get the interview rolling. We're done. I look at the clock. I still got like 3 or 4 minutes. I'm like, cool, I'm good. Done. You guys are free. Next. And LeBron walks over to me and puts his hand out and it's like, thank you. And that was my introduction to LeBron. And I realized at that moment, he is asked so much of himself that he just likes when people just respect his time and allow him to be himself, get what you need, and keep it moving. So for that 4 years on, that's what I always do. I don't pretend to be friends with him. I'm not. If I see him in the street, we say what's up, keep it moving. But he always respected, like, hey, let's have fun. And so we had some really good times where he would come in our room, we would do stuff. Our announcer Jason Jackson and him became close, good working relationship, and he would just have fun with us, and we would just embrace it. And so that was my 4 years with LeBron from a working standpoint, traveling around. It was like being with the biggest team. I don't want to say the Beatles because you're way too young for that, but BTS, whoever it is, like it was just traveling around with the biggest stars, and you're just, fortunate to be around that. And you're fortunate to, behind me is a couple championship rings that he helped bring to the city. Like it just changed. It didn't change. Shaq actually changed everything, but it just built on the what already had been established by Shaq. And we were just a championship franchise, and you just understood how to deal with that. Now I'm gonna backtrack for a second, Brandon, because I want to tell you, Shaq came in, changed everything. We won a championship. 2 years later, we won 15 games. 15. We were awful. But that year was the best year to learn how to produce because you had to tell so many stories. You had to figure out how to tell the other team's stories in a creative way. And so for me, that was my biggest year of growth. And I really appreciated that year. And one day, Mike Tirico came to watch, he came to work one of our games, and he was talking to our announcer, Eric Reed, and they have a good relationship. I don't know Tirico, but he's sitting there telling Eric Reed, he's like, hey, you guys do a really good job on your broadcast. He's like, I was watching it to prepare. You had all these stories. You had all of this. He didn't know. I'm just standing there and I'm just like beaming because that was our work. We had put in a lot of work to get all of those things ready. And we only had like 12 wins at the time, but it didn't matter. And for him to say that just meant to me like, hey, you really have to work at this. And this is something that, when your team stinks, you be prepared. When your team's great, you're prepared. I say that to say when LeBron came, we won all the time. It was easy if I wanted to just mail it in. Hey, just show LeBron. That's all people want to see. But you get that experience from being bad to being really good, and you balance it. And you learn how to storytell when you have a good team. You learn how to storytell when you have a bad team. And to me, that's the epitome of being a really good broadcast. It's like you want to constantly, the team record doesn't matter. Your job is to storytell and to find the best way to tell those stories and to show the game. People want to see the game, so get in, get out, let people watch the game and consistently try to weave and tell those stories. And that becomes fun for the viewer. They're sitting at home and our ratings started to skyrocket. And it wasn't just because of LeBron. Now, don't get me wrong, he played a big part in it, but our ratings stayed pretty high after he left. It's because we had found a way to connect to our viewer. We used social media before a lot of people. We would do a Facebook Friday, and we would have these games where we would have, fans write in, and we attached our announcers to our viewers and Twitter and all these other things. They connected to them. And we just saw our ratings continue to climb to where we're still one of the top, 7-8 teams every year in ratings. And it doesn't matter how good our team is. And for me as a producer, that means, hey, you have to bring it. You need to make sure that you're doing creative work, you're pushing it, and record doesn't matter. So working with LeBron, working with people on that team that won 15 games like Blake Ahern, who no one had heard of, actually doing really well for himself right now, that helped build me into a better storyteller, into a better producer.
What was it like during the time when LeBron did win all those championships back to back?
It was just fun. It was just a lot of fun. Again, it was one of those pinch me moments. Like you never thought that you would be in that spot. You never thought that you would be, a part of that type of team. And, I was just very fortunate. And I always try to remain humble about that and recognize that, like, hey, I'm from Roanoke, Virginia, man. Like, nobody expected me to be here, to be in this moment, and to be able to be here, appreciate that and don't take that for granted. So, being around that, being able to have my parents come in to go to championship games. My father's a trip, right? He'll call you and be like, "Hey, I'm on my way." Like, on your way where? They live in Virginia. I live in Miami. He's like, "Oh, I'm on my way to game 7." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like, he just expects to have a ticket, and I get him a ticket. And he said, it was great because that's what you want for me as a child, to be able to give back to your parents and be like, "Hey, you know what? You want to come to an NBA Finals game? Cool." He would hop on a plane. My mother was a flight attendant, so he knew how to navigate all of that our whole lives. And so he would hop on a plane, come down to Miami, just pop up. He knew his way around Miami, get to my place. I'd have a ticket waiting for him. He'd go to game 6 when Ray Allen hits the shot. He was in the crowd watching. I'm at work in the back of the arena getting ready for the broadcast, thinking that the season was about to be over. And game 7, so those experiences to me is what really are rewarding. It's to be able to share it with whomever, your godchildren get to come to the game, or whoever gets to come to the game and be a part of it and get to meet D Wade and be around these people. That is what's so rewarding. It's not, the monetary things or the rings or things of that nature. For me, it's really the experiences that I never thought I would have, ever. Brandon, I was the type of kid that would be in detention, for being a smart aleck and talking trash or talking too much, not being bad, but being bad as far as like using my just talking. But I never thought I would be here. So, to have that whole thing play full cycle, it's like, I don't take it for granted at all. There's not a day that I go by and I say, "Hey, I'm supposed to be here." Nah, I'm not. But, I am here, and I need to take advantage of that and just keep growing. You got to constantly be looking for ways to grow. You constantly be looking for ways to diversify yourself. And so for me, that never stops. I'm always looking for a different way to expand my knowledge.
What is a typical game day like for you before COVID and during COVID now as a
Whew.
broadcaster?
Okay. Well, the short answer to that is pre-COVID, we would travel. We would go, let's say we were playing New York. We would travel from Miami that day before at like 3 o'clock. We were spoiled. We, flew on a private plane and flew up to Jersey, and we would train or bus over to New York and stay in the city. The next, that night is when most of your preparation happens. When you're a producer, it's like you're collaborating with your announcers, you're talking to everybody, you're building the stories that you want to tell, you're doing your research. So we're fortunate to have Bob Hewitt on our team, who is a great producer, graphics producer. He's a producer, but and so I would write him, and we go over hey, here's some graphics I'm thinking about doing. Here's the graphics I have. You collaborate with your announcers. Here's some graphics I'm thinking about doing. Here's some stories I'm thinking about telling. And you're really just building all of those things. Then you have to sit down and you have to organize everything. Okay, here's how we're going to tell this story. This is what we're going to do. So you do all of that the night before. Then the next morning, for me, we have our meeting. We have our broadcasting meeting. I get with all of our announcers. We go over, hey, this is how we're going to start the show. Here's some other stories that we're going to do throughout the show. Here's some sponsors that we have to pay off. Familiarize yourself with this and that, so on and so forth. So that's usually at like 10:15. I think I would always set that meeting. And so from there, we would go to the arena. So we would always be over there. If the game's at 7, we would be over there 6.5, 7 hours beforehand. And it's always funny because the players are like, "You guys get here this early?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is what we do, man. Like, this is how the game gets on TV." So we get there, say we get there at 11:30. We start setting up. The truck is a new truck. People always ask this question: does the truck go where you go? Like, no, there's a new television truck in each city. We get there, we have to set it up from scratch. There's new engineers there. We usually know them because they're the same engineers in each city. So we go in, we start loading up all of our elements that we have to load, all the graphics that you see, all the little pretty things that you see on the broadcast. They don't just pop up. They're not just sitting there. You have to build those things. They have to be researched. They have to be created. And you're doing all of that, and you're making the TV, right? You're putting all the stuff together to make the cake. And so then you do all of those things, and then the players and the announcers and everybody shows up, and you have a pregame show that may start at 7 o'clock. You do that pregame show, either on site or hopefully you have a studio. They'll do it from Fort Lauderdale for us. Anthony Biasi does a great job with that. So we'll go on that studio show. We'll go from there, and then boom, at 7:30, it's game time. Now, all that research, all the things that I've done, I should say we've done, we put together, and now we're starting to tell those stories, and the game's unfolding. We go through the games about 2.5 hours. So about 10:15, the game starts to wind down. You win or you lose. For me, I try to stay balanced. So I try to keep I don't try to be all heat or all, I just try to keep good balance. I'm usually probably 60-40 to storytell. And then, game's over. You help them with a post-game show, or you do it from site if you have to do it. Then next thing you know, Brandon, guess what? You got to clean up all that stuff that you had. There's a crew there with a bunch of people that help you, and they take the cameras and all of that. But for me, I had to take all the drives, all the footage, all those highlights. They don't just magically go into the cloud and boom, they're there. Like, no, you have to save them. You have to put them on a drive. You have to take all that stuff with you. Then you go get on the bus before the team gets out. You get on the bus and you're ready to go to whatever city you're going to next. And usually, let's say it's Boston. So you go from there, you travel, you get on the bus, you get on the plane, you travel to Boston. And I don't want this to seem like, oh, woe is me, because it's not. It's a good lifestyle. But that's the day. That's how your day. And then if you're playing a back-to-back, you're doing all of that again the next day. So you're getting up early again. You're doing your research on the plane. You're doing all those things, as you're traveling, and you're getting ready to put together a show for the next day. Or a lot of times you have a day off. So that day off is your prep day. You gather yourself, you get everything together, you enjoy whatever city you're in. I like to go to have a nice meal, see friends if I'm in a city that I have friends, hang out for a minute, then go do my research and do the whole thing. That's pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we didn't travel. We did everything from Miami. So we had to learn how to do that. So you had to set up the truck, set up everything, and leave it in Miami. And hopefully your truck wouldn't change on you. So that became actually not a bad thing. I've been traveling so long, I was good. I'm like, I didn't need to go travel to all these cities. I was happy this past year, just staying home, be with my family, be able to go back and forth to work, which isn't far from where I live. So like all of those things were convenient. The inconvenient part was just the adjustment. When we first got in the bubble, it was a lot of work, man. Like, because it just came out of the blue, and next thing you know, they're going to be in Orlando. You're going to be here in Miami. You have to do a broadcast. People expect it to be at this level, because that's what you've always done. So it's like, man, how am I going to turn this around? How are we going to turn this around? And so we had a really good team. And so people focused on the logistics. I would focus on the storytelling. Other people focused on the audio. People focused on we had people that were really good at what they did, and everybody focused on those things, and we were able to get on. And we started, I think it was July 23rd, and those first 8 games, I'm like, man, this is going to be rough. And we just figured it out. By game 5, we had gotten into a decent groove. And so we're like, okay, this is cool. And so I didn't think, this team was going to be that good. I'm like, you never know. So my experience has told me, you just sort of just take the ride. But I also plan vacations. So I'm like, all right, you know what? Second round, we'll probably be done. Milwaukee may beat us, whatever. I didn't know we were going to go to the finals, Brandon. Like, we ended up riding the team all the way to the finals, going all the way up until October, and like, which was weird anyway, because it was, the fall, you're playing NBA basketball. But that was just a fun ride that you just don't know. So you just say, you know what? Let's go. And you just take the ride and you enjoy it, and you take it as long as it lasts, and you just go along with the wave, and you see where it ends. And it was a really fun team to be around. And so that experience was great, but then it helped prepare us, because there's like, hey, we had thought that rumors were we weren't going to start until like February. So I'm like, okay, we'll have some time to rest. Nope. The powers that be, television and money, spoke and said, hey, we want you guys to start December 23rd. Like, December 23rd? We just finished October 13th or whatever it was. So no rest for the weary. We turned it around, got back, but it was good because that experience allowed us to be prepared for that. So it wasn't as much of an adjustment. We had already gone through it in the bubble, so we had to adjust to it, and we made that adjustment pretty quickly. And then we ended up realizing, like, hey, I'm not traveling, from New York to Boston in the middle of the night. I'm just going home. It takes me 10 minutes, go home. I research, I do what I got to do. I wake up the next morning. I'm in Miami. This isn't bad. So for me, I started to adjust to that. I don't think that it will stay that way for the announcers. I think the announcers will start traveling again next season. I'm not sure about the production teams. I think they found that there's a way to be able to cut costs and be able to do some production from site. So I don't know the answer to if that's going to change or not, but I'll just take the ride. There's benefits to it both, and you just sort of see what happens.
What is the process, of course, with getting time slotted on ESPN to have Miami games broadcast nationally?
So I'll give you the short version for that. So I work for the Miami Heat, and so I'm the producer on the Heat. So our broadcasts are now on Bally Sports Sun. So Bally Sports is the regional provider for the Miami Heat. ESPN and TNT do the national broadcast. So they can come in and they can look at your schedule and they can say, hey, we're going to take up to 12 games, I think it is, and make them all national. And so for you, there's going to be a lot of those games that they say, hey, these are exclusive games, and the regional broadcast, you guys can't do it. So then, TNT does the game and there won't be a regional broadcast. Those will be days that I don't work the game. When we had LeBron and Shaq, it was frequent. We had a ton of those, and you would start to scheduling them. You knew in their schedule, like, okay, they're doing this game. We're not doing that game. We're not doing that game. But then when your team's not as good, you don't have as many. So you'll have 4, maybe 5. And so that, to answer your question, ESPN and TNT go through the schedule and they start looking at, what games they want to make national television games. And so last year, for example, we knew that the Laker game would be nationally televised because we had played them in the NBA finals. And so, right away that those would be one would be right around, they usually try to do it around Christmas during normal times, but it wasn't normal. So, usually that game is right around Christmas. You play the 2 teams that played in the finals are going to be the big game on Christmas Day. So that's kind of how that worked. There's a lot more to it. I won't bore you with all the details behind it, but that's kind of how that works.
What is something that you learn now that you didn't know before becoming a television broadcaster?
For as becoming a television producer, I didn't realize how many jobs there were in television. I didn't realize, all the roles. There's a good friend of mine, Levon Wright, who he's an EVS operator, which means he's a tape operator. He does all the replays, but really he's an editor, and he does the Super Bowl. He does any major event he wants to do because he's that good at it. I didn't know those jobs existed. I didn't know that you could be an audio engineer and be, work on our broadcast and then go work also the Super Bowl and work different events. And so I've seen our A1s, as they're called, travel and get all these different jobs. I didn't know that, there was a guy who shaded the cameras or a girl who shaded the cameras, and they were responsible for making sure the color was corrected. And you could do that job and go travel all around for ESPN and for Fox and do that and make that a living. There's so many jobs in television and just behind the scenes that you aren't aware of. And so that would be my answer to you, is like, I was unaware of all of the opportunities that allow people to make a living and make a really good living for some of these people. You get paid per game and you get paid to travel, and they, some of these camera operators will travel to each city and, they get 4 days rate for that. And so it's like, there's a lot of opportunity there that I was unaware of, and so it's cool to meet all these different people and to figure out, like, hey, what is your role? How are you trying to be the best at your role? And for me, it's the same. How am I trying to be the best at my role? Okay, cool. I want those people all to work together. I want to work on a team that has the people that are all striving to be the best. So I want the best graphic producer. I want the best, stage manager. I want the best of everything, because I want everyone to be working on the same thing, because that's what we're doing. We're our team. There's the team, the Miami Heat on the floor, and then there's the Miami Heat broadcast team. And that's us. And so our goals need to be equally as high. We need to be striving to be championship level. And that's what we do. We are considered one of the best because we put in the work. I don't have any problem saying that. but it's one of those things where that's the goal that we set that goal every season. Is like, hey, how are we going to get better? If we just sit on the same level and just stay right here, that's whack. But how are we as a team going to get better? And so in order to do that, all the people around you have to have that same mindset. Everybody has to be working to, like, all right, you know what, I'm not going to be lazy today, I'm going to push it and push myself. And that's what we try to do.
What are some of your future plans in your career?
So a while ago when we started this conversation, I had told you that my goal was to, work every Olympics, right? So I didn't get to do that. I worked in 2000, and so I didn't work. I went in 2000 to Australia for pleasure, and I hadn't been back. So a couple of years ago, I said to myself, I'm like, all right, you know what? You're always preaching this multiple streams of income. You're always preaching trying to create new opportunities for yourself. So I reached out to the producer of the Utah Jazz, Trav, and asked him, like, hey, he works on the Olympic broadcast, and it's based out of Madrid. And basically, he produces a lot of the things for the Olympics. So a lot of basketball or different events, he works with them. So I'm like, hey, if you ever need anybody to help, I'll be happy to help you, to try to get involved. He's like, I don't really have anything, but I'll let you know. So then he calls me back a little while later and he's like, hey, there's an opportunity. It's not a producer, but it's, helping in the tape room. Would you be willing to do that? Sure. Like, you know what? I'm going to get to go to Tokyo. My sister was born there. My parents met there. They were married there, still married 49 years later. But that opportunity was like, okay, I'll do that. So then what happened was COVID hit and we didn't get to go. And then somebody bailed and he called me back. He's like, hey, a producer spot opened up. Would you be willing to produce in the Olympics? I'm like, produce basketball? Like what we do? He's like, yeah. I'm like, of course, so part of me as we sit here now, is excited about the opportunity to possibly go to Japan and work the Olympics. But every day, Brandon, I get a different article from a friend or someone just saying the situation that's going on over in Japan right now with COVID. I'm not sure the Olympics are going to happen, but I felt that same way about the NBA bubble. And money talked. At the end of the day, it was just so much money involved that they made the bubble happen. And I think the Olympics may happen. But for me, I tell you all of that to say that that's the next thing that I'll be doing is hopefully, producing in the Olympics. And what that means is it's not NBC Sports. So there's a different station. And what they do is they provide a feed, which is called a world feed. And they provide that feed to all the countries all over the world. So, somewhere in Uganda wants to broadcast, men's or women's basketball. I'll be working on a crew. We have a crew, same like I told you before, a crew of people with tape operators and audio engineers. And we'll be doing 2 games a day. And then there's another crew that'll do 2 games at night. We'll do men and women's basketball and we'll produce it and send it back all over the world. And then they will add their announcers on wherever they are on location. And they'll add their announcers and they'll add whatever other pretty stuff they want to add. And we send out and we produce that world feed for basketball. So for me, it's cool because it gets to go back to what I told you before is like, hey, I always wanted to work the Olympics. I always wanted to be involved in the Olympics. So it's an opportunity to get in there and see if I can prove myself. And as I've told you throughout this conversation, it's like, that's one common thread with me. It's like, create opportunities for yourself, give yourself opportunities, and then go in there and prove yourself and try to prove that you could be the best that you could be at whatever opportunity is that you've been given or you've been granted. So that's what I try to do, Brandon. So that's what's next. The other thing is we started this podcast called Beyond the Lens. You can check it out on Apple or Spotify. And really, my man Seth, who helped me get in at the Heat into the broadcast department, that story I told you about boxing, that was Seth. He called me, or we connected. He's like, hey, they're doing boxing. You should come and help. And that took off. But Seth wrote me and was like, hey, I want to do this podcast and, I want to interview people and, we talk about sports documentaries, would you be willing to do it with me? And I'm like, you know what? I'm a little busy right now and he's busy too, but I'm like, let's do one interview, see how it goes. And if it goes well, we'll run with it. So we did one interview. And to be honest with you, Brandon, it's really cool because the concept is basically you watch a documentary, you watch a sports documentary, and then you try to get the director, the producer, it could be the director of photography, the audio. You try to get somebody involved that was heavily involved in that documentary, and you get them on and you just talk to them about it. And so those conversations have really been good because you just learn, you're just constantly learning. And so, for me, it was a good way to get out of the rut that has been the pandemic for the last 15 or so months, however long it's been now, just that same routine. And so now it's mixing it up and not binging power, and it's watching some different shows, it's watching different documentaries and learning something, taking notes, meeting with those people, finding out their creative ways of how they're storytelling. So that's been something that has been really enjoyable. And during the summer, I'll spend a lot of time focused on trying to develop that and work on that with Seth. So it's Beyond the Lens. You can check it out on Apple or Spotify. And I encourage you to, if you can, watch some of those documentaries first. Sometimes it's cool to just listen, but sometimes we may end up giving up something if you don't know all the story. So I encourage, if you have the time, check out the documentary, because the documentaries are really what drive the story. And the people that tell it, we talk to them, find their story. We do it in 3 acts, like a film. We do a story, where they're from. We do the focus on the documentary, and then we do some quick little fun questions on the backside. So to answer your question, that's what I'm up to next. It's always trying to grow. It's always trying to do something to make myself, learn and just be a better person. So that would be it occupationally. Sorry, let me cut you off.
That's pretty cool. What advice would you give somebody looking to get into the sports industry as a broadcaster?
As a broadcaster or as a producer?
Broadcaster and producer.
Okay. It's a little different because in broadcasting, when you're on air, you have to constantly, like you're doing, you have to constantly, get reps. You have to get as many reps as you can. You have to get as much experience as you can. You have to get out there and try to, prove yourself and just learn different sports. You have to be willing to, call or announce whatever opportunity is given to you. As a producer, it's the same thing, but you really need to learn from an internship. You got to get behind the scenes. You have to dedicate yourself to storytelling. You have to start learning how you want to, edit. You start with different features, and maybe you end up working on some live events, and you have to prove yourself in whatever role that is given to you. And so my advice to people is like, never think that you're above anything. And I told you the story, the kid with the boom mic, he didn't want to do the boom mic. Like, that is what got me to my opportunity at HBO Sports. Like, I've never, and to this day, and I just told you a story about the Olympics, I'll never think I'm above anything. The title really doesn't matter to me. It's the opportunity that matters to me. And if I take advantage of that opportunity, it's going to create higher titles. And that's just the way it's been, where it's worked for me. And some people say, oh, you're just lucky. I don't believe that. I believe that I create a lot of my luck because I'm constantly trying to push and grind and create other opportunities for myself. And when you get complacent, those opportunities don't happen. And I've been there too. And it's just like, man, I've been in this same whatever, but that's because I've gotten complacent. So, for me, it's always about creating those opportunities for yourself and then allowing that to, whatever happens after that. And you just deal with it. Does that make sense?
That's amazing. Where can my listeners find you at on social media?
They can hit me up on Mr. AJ Speaks. You can hit me. Don't hit me on Instagram. I'm terrible on Instagram. You can hit me on Twitter. You can think it's AJ Speaks on LinkedIn. You can hit me up there. And you can even hit me on my work email, aspeaks@heat.com. If I can answer anybody's questions, it's really important to me to shine a light on the behind the scenes. I want more people, more women, more people of color, more people of just different backgrounds to learn about the opportunities that exist here, because people aren't always exposed to it. That's why, for me, I appreciate you having me on as a guest, because your listeners will learn and be like, oh, I didn't know this was a job opportunity, or I didn't know this, or I didn't know that, and that just creates awareness, right? And so now people are aware, and they start realizing like, oh, somebody that looks like AJ, oh, you could go be a producer. Yeah, you make a good living being a producer. You can have a great lifestyle being a producer. It's an opportunity. We started this by asking like, hey, I thought I wanted to be a player. No, that wasn't realistic. But I have been able to live a lifestyle that shows me a lot of different things behind the scenes with a lot of NBA players. I would have never thought that in my life ever. So that's why I think it's important to share this information. I never want to come across as bragging, but just, hey, this is how I live. This is the way it is, so that people understand they can do this too. They just have to work.
Thank you again, AJ Speaks, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with the Miami Heat as the senior television producer and broadcaster.
Thank you, Brandon. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, AJ Speaks, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thank you, Brandon. Same to you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.